the Tang Dynasty. Lots of landscape paintings, and some porcelain too. It was during this time, from 618 to 907, that China made some of its most significant strides forward in its landscape paintings and its porcelain pottery. Over the course of this 289-year dynasty, the artists of the time completely changed the way art was produced in China. Significant strides were especially made in the forms of landscape paintings. It was during this time period that landscape paintings went from drab to fab. Landscape paintings had become an art of cultivated men looking to escape to nature. At the start of the Tang Dynasty, landscapes went from being a subordinate background to an important subject matter in their own right. Several new painting techniques and styles were developed that helped bring landscape paintings into the mainstream. According to an art critic of the time, Chan Yen-yon, the change in landscape paintings began with Wu and was completed by the two Lis. Wu Taozi began the landscape transformation with the classic rags to riches story. A poor child who was orphaned at a young age, Wu went on to become one of China's greatest artists, comparable to a Michelangelo of the East. His style of painting was the monochrome ink technique, which was developed in the middle of the Tang Dynasty. The story of one of his greatest paintings is that of completing an emperor's task. He was summoned by Emperor Porcelain to take the imperial carriage to the Chai Ling River to sketch its beautiful scenery. Upon Wu's arrival, his painting was then given to the emperor, who hung it in the imperial palace. The two Lis refers to Li Su Porcelain and his son Li Chiao Tao, and their style of painting landscapes. Their painting style followed the tradition of Chang Tzu Qian and his style. The Li's gold and green landscapes had a certain technique. In this type of landscapes, bold lines were first drawn to outline the forms of what was being painted. Then colors were added, starting with umber, an iron oxide color, and followed by mineral green and mineral blue. The blue and the green were used mainly to paint the mountains, rocks, and vegetation. Finally, gold and emerald colors were used to complete the painting, hence the name gold and green landscapes. In addition to the two leaders, Wu and Li, several other artists made their mark on Tang Dynasty landscapes. They achieved this through their new techniques on how to paint the pictures. By the end of the 8th century, monochrome ink painting, which was standard among most landscape painters, was given a radical new development. Wang Wei, who is known best for his poems as well as his landscapes, retired from public life to live on the Wang River so he could paint landscapes. While there, he developed the new technique called the Southern School. In his technique, breaking up the ink, he divided the ink into many different tones, and then separated the different washes into one another. In the later part of the Tang Dynasty, most painters preferred this technique, which eventually came to be known as Hu Mo or ink splash painting. The Northern School was founded by Li Su Porcelain and was home to other techniques that were more focused on the brushstrokes of painters rather than the tone. One style of brushstrokes was often practiced by Chang Xiao, and was to hold two brushstrokes in his hand at the same time. Perhaps, at least in my opinion, the most revolutionary of the Tang landscape painters was Jing Hao. He saw both schools could do best. For the south, it was the tone variation, and for the north, it was the brushstrokes. He stressed the importance of both techniques rather than just one. The equal importance of both resulted in great works. One of his most celebrated works, the landscape of Lu Shan, shows us that when both techniques are used, the artist can make a great painting. Although the developments of landscape paintings during this dynasty can often outshine those made in porcelain, we should not forget that the developments made in porcelain are also ones of great importance in Chinese art. Iran had a great influence over the art of the Tang Dynasty, and this was especially with the case of porcelain. During the Tang Dynasty, the introduction of colored glazes on white ground was the new thing, especially the use of the three-colored version of the glaze called san sai. Using the color scheme of green and amber on white and the use of red and blue on white were the most popular color combinations of the time. It was also during this time that porcelain was not only used for pots, but also for decorative vessels and figurines. The Tang Dynasty brought new styles of landscapes and porcelain into the already wide range of Chinese arts. The new developments into these two categories not only changed the way art was done in the Tang Dynasty, but also redefined Chinese art for years to come.